Let me tell you a story about the legendary Argentinian footballer Gabriel Batistuta. He was Argentina's top goal scorer with 56 goals in 78 games, and he participated in 3 World Cups. In 2014, he asked a doctor to amputate his leg. Not because of a sudden accident, but because of years of pain that had become unbearable. Throughout his career, Batistuta played through injury after injury. He'd take painkillers, get an X-ray, rest for a few weeks, and head back out on the pitch. Time and again, he was told there was no major damage. Nothing broken. Just a sprain. Just inflammation. He should just rest. But the pain didn't stop. Because what those X-rays couldn't see was the truth. There were microfractures, he had torn ligaments, and he had years of accumulated damage that standard scans missed. And it wasn't until years later, with more advanced imaging, that the full extent of the problem was revealed, and Gabriel could get the care he actually needed. And in the end, he didn't need his leg amputated. That's the difference. An X-ray tells you if something's broken, but an MRI shows you everything else. Businesses face the same problem. On the surface, your processes might look fine. Orders go out, payments come in, but beneath that, there's still hidden inefficiencies and silent bottlenecks. Today, we're talking about how object-centric process mining is the MRI of your business. It reveals the unseen, and it gives you the power to fix what's really broken. We will look at how it fuels AI and how BMW uses it for smarter sales management. Welcome to Trust the Process, the podcast that demystifies the world of process mining and process intelligence. I'm your host, Angela, from the Celonis Academic Alliance. And today we want to understand how object-centric process mining, or short OCPM, goes beyond the case-centric approach. In this episode, we are joined by a couple of brilliant minds. So let me introduce all of them. On the one hand side, we are joined by Will van der Aalst, the godfather of process mining and chief scientist at Celonis. We are also joined by Julian März, a process mining expert from PwC who brings a sharp lens on how OCPM powers AI and predictive intelligence. Julian Fischer, McKinsey partner and local process mining expert at McKinsey. And Patrick Lechner from BMW, who will share real-world use cases on how companies like BMW already put OCPM into motion. Together, we'll explore why traditional process mining might be giving you just an X-ray of your business, when what you really need is an MRI. Let's start with an idea we're all familiar with: ordering from Amazon. You click Buy Now on a new laptop, but behind the scenes, there's much more happening. Your order is created, the item is picked in a warehouse, a shipment is triggered, and an invoice is generated. That's just to name a few. There's multiple things that are moving, not just your order. Traditional process mining would follow that order as a single case. It's neat, it's simple, but also limited.
Classical process mining is using the same idea that you're trying to track a single case, how a case is flowing through the process, and you try to capture that. So that is working very well, but you can think of that as a kind of 2D image of your process.
In other words, we're looking at an X-ray. But when we switch to object-centric process mining, or OCPM, it's like upgrading to an MRI. Suddenly, you're not just seeing the order. You're seeing the shipment, the product, the customer, the vendor, and the invoice. All of that as distinct objects. So, what exactly is an object?
So case-centric process mining is the classical view on processes where we make the assumption that if something happens, which we call an event, that an event is referring just to a single object, which we typically call a case. And so, for example, if you go to a hospital setting, there you have the event take a blood test, and then you just link it to the patient. right? And that's the only object involved. If you look at object-centric process mining and you would go to the same setting, then an event, for example, taking a blood test, can refer to any number of objects. So it's not just referring to the patient, it is also referring, for example, to the doctor, it's referring to the equipment being used, and all of these other aspects. And by enriching events with not just looking at a single case, but looking at any number of objects, you are able to create a much richer description of the process itself.
And that's the core difference. In OCPM, every event can be connected to many different objects. And every object can participate in many different events. These are called object-to-event relationships.
So if you look at object-centric process mining, there are basically two main ingredients, and these are objects and events. Objects are things that are flowing through a process, and there you can think of a patient, or you can think of a medical device, or you can think of a doctor. Events are the active components, so they refer to something that is happening at a particular point in time. And when you talk about an event, you can think of things like taking a blood test, sending the medical bill after your treatment. These are examples of events. And of course, it's very important to capture how in one event multiple objects may be involved.
But it's even more than that. OCPM allows us to explore object-to-object relationships, which is how different objects interact with each other over time. Let's go back to that Amazon order. The shipment is tied to your order, which is tied to a customer, and also a product and a supplier. The strength of OCPM is in capturing and analyzing these webs of information rather than just a list. If you look at one object, like a sales order, you're missing how that object interacts with others. But when you connect those objects, order to item, item to vendor, vendor to shipment, you build a complete picture of the process.
Yeah, so object-centric process mining has three main benefits. And the first main benefit is that you are creating a single source of truth. So you are extracting your data from your source systems only once, and you do it in such a way that you're actually capturing reality very well. This avoids going repeatedly back to your source system each time you have a new question. So it creates a single source of truth. That's one main advantage. Another main advantage is that you avoid the typical distortions that you get if you're trying to squeeze a three-dimensional reality in a two-dimensional view. So using object-centric process mining, you are no longer forced to replicate your events if an event is involving multiple objects. So it leads to a much clearer and a much more precise picture of your processes. The third advantage is that you're able to answer questions that you could not answer before. Using object-centric process mining, you're, for example, able to analyze if you're unable to deliver your customers in time, what are the root causes? The root causes can be in the sales department, they can be in production, they can be in logistics.
So instead of one flat timeline per case, you get a web of interconnected activities. And this web is what allows organizations to see their processes in 3D. And that's crucial in domains like sales, accounting, or procurement, where complexity often hides in the handovers between departments. So you are not just watching one object move, you see how they move together. Let's return to our metaphor of X-rays versus MRIs. Imagine you're feeding data to an AI model, and you want it to spot inefficiencies, predict outcomes, or recommend actions. If you give it a flat, two-dimensional view, like an X-ray, you're limiting what it can learn. However, when you give it the full, rich, multi-object context of OCPM, that's like giving AI an MRI to work with. Julia, who is a partner at PwC, explains the full picture.
Process intelligence defines a much broader scope. It includes using these insights to monitor, optimize, automate, or predict process performance, integrating various data sources and advanced analytics to derive a comprehensive process understanding.
I want to unpack that a bit further. AI needs data, But not just more data, it needs contextualized data. So that's who's involved, what systems touch the process, which supplier caused the delay. In an order management process, like our Amazon order from before, traditional models might see a delay in delivery and then assume the problem is in the shipment. But with OCPM, you might find that the real issue lies 2 steps earlier. For example, in inventory management, when one item isn't available.
Object-centric process mining is particularly useful in consulting for industries or clients with complex or interrelated processes across several systems, SAP and non-SAP, such as manufacturing or supply chain management, to build up whole and entire end-to-end process chains.
OCPM combines information from several processes. And with that, it also helps with convergence and divergence. That's a fancy way of saying when do multiple objects come together in a process and when do they split apart. Take our example from sales management. A single order placement might converge data from online customer journeys and inventory radars whenever an order is placed. Later on, that same journey might diverge again into separate paths, like invoice handling and delivery logistics. Understanding these patterns gives a more fine-grained view of the process.
A process chain is a broader scope. It's a mapping purchase to pay with account payables and record to report, end to end. And a simple use case is only a part of this chain. For example, purchase to pay without accounts payables and record to report. A process chain, you get much more deliverables and value in there. For example, if you analyze P2P and accounts payables, you can have the result where the challenges from accounts payables are, for example, master data maintenance.
When we look at real processes, especially across departments, they don't follow clean paths. They overlap, converge, and diverge. And that's where object-centric models shine. After this break, we'll take a look at the sales management processes of BMW and how OCPM helps them to create a customer experience that is as much fun as driving a BMW.
Imagine your dream role in process excellence, business analytics, or digital transformation, just one click away. Introducing ProcessMiningJobs.com, where top talent meets top opportunity. Whether you're searching for your next big move or looking to hire the best in the business, this is where careers accelerate and teams level up. Because the future of work is all about matching minds and markets. Explore opportunities and discover what's next at ProcessMiningJobs.com.
Since 2017, BMW has been on a process intelligence journey. It started, like many companies, with basic discovery, just trying to understand your processes. But what began with a single use case in a paint shop has since evolved into one of the most advanced OCPM deployments in the automotive world. Patrick Lechner, head of process mining at BMW, recalls those early days.
Well, here at BMW, we started very simple with simple discovery. So we wanted to understand our processes better. And this was a very important step for us at the beginning. But then soon we looked into how can we improve our processes together with our experts. And this was an expert tool then that was used by a couple of users.
And it worked. But more importantly, it sparked something. As adoption spread across departments, BMW transitioned from a simple case-centric process mining approach to an object-centric approach. And that shift changed everything, especially in sales and order management, where processes aren't linear, they're interwoven.
Next, and we are there at the moment, was OCPM, when we decided we have to look at the use cases in a more general way. So not only simple use cases, one case or one object ID going through the whole process, but really understanding the interaction between processes.
And here's what that means in practice. Let's say a customer places an order with BMW. In a traditional system, you'd follow that sales order like a straight line. But in reality, that sales order interacts with other objects. So there are product objects. That is, which model was ordered. There are shipment objects, looking at who delivered, how was it delivered, and when was it delivered. Customer objects, who ordered it. Invoice objects, when was it billed, was the payment received. And dealer objects, which dealer fulfilled the order.
For the first time, I think we can really see the customer journey. So we really see customer in the process and see what's happening with the customer, how is he dealt with by the dealer, by our financial services colleagues, and so on. So it's the first time we really see this perspective. Before, we only saw what's happening with the offer, how was this dealt with, when did he get a financial offer, and we can also see how can we support the customer best when he needs financing options, which customer we can interact in which way. So it's really very individual, but also based on the history that we are having. And the tool in our target picture is really used also by all those experts so that they can really look into and see, okay, how can we get even better and what was maybe not perfect in this respect for this customer. So next time we can help the customer even better.
And these aren't just data points. In OCPM, each of these is modeled as an object. And every interaction, creating the order, confirming the shipment, or generating the invoice, is an event. And this creates a web of object to event relationships. Julian Fischer is a partner at McKinsey, and he explains how the different objects interact for automotive customer care.
It's interesting in the automotive industry, and I used to work for Knorr-Bremse and BMW before my time in McKinsey, so I know them a bit from back then, is that they're normally highly complex supply chains. They're big organizations. They have fairly complex products. They're heavily focused on engineering and marketing as some of the leading basically functions in the organization. And they also have been on journeys for years of process efficiency, but primarily with a focus on the manufacturing footprint. If you think of the benefits that process intelligence brings, it's more than that. It's broader than that. It's being able to link, for example, in an automotive case, a dealer's behavior for ordering new cars to the delivery structure behind, to what's sitting somewhere in a compound to support that dealer, to link that to final assembly, to a body shop, to a paint shop, and then to a complex supply network, which is something which was just with Excel not possible in the past. And I love to see that there's so many use cases also emerging in that space to optimize the supply chain of those players.
For example, if a car isn't delivered on time, is it a production issue, a shipment problem, or something with the dealer?
But what we often see is that the root causes of why a certain process cannot perform doesn't sit within the process, but sits in the neighbors left and right, and sits in the interrelations and the interfaces.
This means OCPM helps us build a digital twin, a real-time, context-rich representation of your business. But not all digital models are equal. A digital twin builds on a full analytical data model with full OCPM insights. Our X-ray, on the other hand, is more of a digital shadow with a smaller scope. Back to Will on the difference between twins and shadows.
So the digital twin is used to actually control the real system, whereas a digital shadow is just like an image of the real organization or process. I think that's one way that you can define it. Another way that you can define it is that the digital shadow is deliberately kept small. It is deliberately kept simple in such a way that you can use it in an operational way. And you're not trying to make a perfect copy. You're trying to make a copy that serves your purpose.
So the digital twin is the self-driving car. It's aware of its environment and ready to act when needed. The digital shadow is more like a dashboard snapshot. It's useful, but static.
So in my view, there are two ways of distinguishing digital shadows from digital twins. I think this first distinction could be that a digital twin is something that is active. So the digital twin is being used to directly control the process or system, whereas a digital shadow is just trying to make a copy that looks good. I think that's one distinction. Another distinction that some people would make is that a digital shadow is kept deliberately very simple, whereas a digital twin is typically trying to capture an organization or process in all of its detail, but the digital shadow is kept very simple in such a way that you can use it in an operational setting.
With OCPM, organizations can move from shadows to twins, from observing the process to shaping it. Because the truth of the process lives in the connections between objects and events, and in the ability to model all of them together, across dimensions and in real time. So let's go back to that first question. Are you looking at your processes with an X-ray or an MRI? Object-Centric Process Mining helps us not just see the steps, but it helps us see the full story. And we call it the MRI of processes. In our next episode, we take off to Munich Airport to explore how OCPM is transforming the customer journey at Lufthansa, from check-in to touchdown. Until then, subscribe, share, and remember, what you can't see might be exactly what you need to understand, because when processes work, everything works.